All right, welcome to the Explainer from Notebook Summaries. Today we are diving deep into the incredible history of Tunisia. This is a nation right at the heart of the Mediterranean, a real crossroads that's been shaped by massive empires, powerful ideas, and most importantly, its own incredibly resilient people.
So, here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to journey through 5 key eras to really get a grip on how Tunisia became the country we know today. We'll start way back with its ancient roots, then get into the epic clash of empires, and bring it all the way up to the creation of the modern nation. Okay, so where do we even begin a story this big? Well, we're not starting with the big empires or the famous conquerors. Nope, we're starting with the land itself and the very first people who called it home. They laid the groundwork for absolutely everything that came after.
Just look at this timeline. The sheer depth of history here is, well, it's staggering. We're talking about human activity stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Long before anyone had even heard of Carthage or Rome, this land was buzzing with sophisticated cultures. And get this, by 950 BC, the local Berbers were so powerful, they actually established a ruling dynasty over in Egypt. That's a huge deal, and it's super important to remember as we move forward. So, if you want to get Tunisian history, you have to start with the Berbers, also known as the Amazigh. And listen, they're not just one single group. Think of them as a diverse collection of peoples who have been here for thousands of years. Their culture, their languages, it all forms the absolute bedrock of Tunisian identity. It's the foundation that everything else was built on top of, and it never, ever went away.
Okay, so we have this ancient foundation, and then a new group arrives that changes the game completely. Phoenician traders sail in and establish a city that's going to become a legendary empire, Carthage. And its rise is going to set off one of the most famous conflicts in all of history.
Now, Carthage didn't just pop up overnight. It took hundreds of years for this new city, or Carthage, to go from a simple trading post to a powerhouse that ruled the seas. But here's the thing about success. It attracts attention. And its dominance put it on a direct, unavoidable collision course with another rising star across the water, Rome. And what makes this rivalry so fascinating is that it was a total clash of civilizations. I mean, look at this. You've got Carthage, an empire of the sea, a thalassocracy, totally built on trade and commerce, using mercenaries who fight for cash. And then you have Rome, a land-based agricultural powerhouse with an army of citizen soldiers fighting for their republic. We're talking about two completely different ways of life, two different philosophies of power, going head-to-head for the biggest prize of all, the Mediterranean. This whole struggle plays out over 3 gigantic conflicts, the Punic Wars. In the first one, Rome is basically forced to build a navy from scratch and wins. The second one, well, that's the famous one with Hannibal and his elephants crossing the Alps. He terrified Rome, but in the end, he couldn't deliver the knockout blow. But the third war, man, that was less of a war and more of an execution. Rome just decided Carthage had to go, and they literally wiped it off the map. But out of those ashes, something totally new began to grow. The Romans turned the region into their province of Africa, and it became unbelievably prosperous. I'm talking breadbasket of the empire prosperous, shipping out enormous amounts of grain. It became a center for Latin culture, and, this is so important, a real hotbed for early Christianity. It even produced one of the faith's most important thinkers, St. Augustine. So, after centuries of Roman rule, plus a bit of a chaotic period with the Vandals and Byzantines, the next massive transformation arrives. A new power sweeps in from the east, from the Arabian Peninsula. This is the arrival of Arab armies in the 7th century, and they bring with them a new faith, Islam, and a new language, Arabic, that will fundamentally change the region's identity forever.
Now, don't think of the next 900 years as just one single static empire. Not at all. It was an incredibly dynamic, often chaotic period of dynasties rising and falling. The region, now called Afriqiya in Arabic, becomes this major hub of Islamic civilization. But who's in charge? Well, that's constantly changing as different powerful families fight for control.
The best way to think about this whole complicated period is as a cycle, right? First, you have the Aghlabids, who set up a strong Sunni state. Then, they get conquered by the Shia Fatimids. The Fatimids then pass the reins to their vassals, the Zirids, who eventually break away. Then the Almohads sweep in and unify the whole region. And finally, the Hafsids break off from them and create their own dynasty, which is when Tunis really becomes the great capital we know today. See? A cycle. And what's wild is that this exact cycle was analyzed by one of the greatest social thinkers in history, And he was from Tunis himself, Ibn Khaldun. He had this brilliant idea he called asabiya, which is basically social solidarity or group cohesion. He argued that a group rises to power because they're tight-knit and unified, but over a few generations, they get soft, that unity falls apart, and they're replaced by a new, hungry group. He was literally watching his own theory play out in real time right there in Tunis. Okay, moving on. By the 1500s, that Hafsid dynasty starts to get weak, and they find themselves caught right in the middle of a huge Mediterranean showdown between two superpowers, Habsburg Spain and the rapidly expanding Ottoman Empire. It was a tough spot to be in, and in the end, the Ottomans came out on top, pulling Tunisia into their massive empire. But Ottoman rule in Tunisia wasn't what you might think. It wasn't some micromanagement from Istanbul. Actually, the power structure on the ground changed a ton over time. It went from a governor sent from the capital to the elite Janissary troops taking over, and then eventually to local dynasties that were basically kings in everything but name. So you get this really interesting split in power between two titles, the Da'i and the Bey. Think of it this way. The Da'i was the military boss, the commander of the Janissaries, controlling the city of Tunis. But the Bey, his job was to manage the countryside and the tribes, and crucially, collect the taxes. And as it often happens, he who controls the money and the land eventually gets all the power. The Beys went out, and they established their own ruling dynasties, like the Husainids, who stuck around for more than 250 years. Fast forward to the 19th century, and the walls start closing in. The government of the Beys is in deep trouble. They're struggling with massive debt, and at the same time, they're getting squeezed by the growing economic might of Europe. They just couldn't hold out against the colonial pressure, and this opens the door to a whole new era of foreign control, but it also lights the spark for a powerful movement for independence. This whole period is just a whirlwind of contradictions. I mean, on the one hand, Tunisia is this incredible pioneer. They abolish slavery way ahead of many others, and they create the very first written constitution in the entire Arab world. Amazing, right? But on the other hand, none of that was enough to stop France from setting up a protectorate in 1881. But it was that very occupation that fired up leaders like Habib Bourguiba, who channeled all that frustration into a movement that would, eventually, win the country its freedom. If you want to really understand the impact of colonialism here, just let this one number sink in for a second. 144,000. That's how many French colonists were living in Tunisia by 1945. This wasn't just a handful of administrators running the show. This was a major demographic shift, and it had a huge economic impact, especially when it came to who controlled the land. And yeah, that's the real heart of the issue. It wasn't just about the number of people. It was about the land. That small colonial population ended up controlling 20%, 1/5 of all the farmable land in Tunisia. For the local population, this was a massive economic blow, and you can bet it became a huge source of anger and a powerful rallying cry for independence. So Tunisia finally gets its independence in 1956, and its first president, Habib Bourguiba, did not waste any time. He immediately got rid of the old monarchy of the Beys and set out to build a modern, secular republic. His vision was incredibly bold, especially his reforms giving women rights that were pretty much unheard of anywhere else in the Arab world at the time. Bourguiba's shadow loomed large over Tunisia for more than 30 years. But in 1987, the now elderly father of the nation was pushed out of power by his own prime minister, Ben Ali. Now, Ben Ali kept the country on a secular path, but his government became much more authoritarian. He cracked down hard on any opposition, creating these political tensions that just bubbled under the surface for the next couple of decades. So when you look at the whole picture, from the ancient Berbers all the way to the modern day, the story of Tunisia is one of constant reinvention. It's about absorbing all these powerful outside influences, Phoenician, Roman, Arab, Ottoman, French, but always forging its own unique identity out of the mix. It's a place defined by its geography as a crossroads, leaving behind a legacy of incredible resilience and leaving us all wondering, what comes next? And that's a wrap on our quick history of Tunisia. I hope you found this explainer useful. If you want to dive into another country's story, definitely check out our Quick Country Histories playlist. And of course, please subscribe to Notebook Summaries so you don't miss our next deep dive. Thanks so much for watching.